Hi everyone. So it looks like we had a technical glitch and I dropped out. We continued with the session and we completed the session with all the activities, but it looks like the recording, although it was on all the time, wasn't saved. So what I'm doing now, I am recapping everything from the discussion, and for the benefit of those who may be watching this recording the following day. Okay, so where we stopped in the first segment was basically technical requirements of the assignment one, and the rest of the session was really back onto the concepts. And let me just recap what we have discussed. So the guidance and common pitfalls that I usually observe in assignment when I read assignment one, so those templates. Now, what is essential that what you need for the task is the topics 1, 2, and 3, and there is only one small segment from topic 3 that you really can directly apply it in your observation of the meeting that you are doing. Sections 3.2 and 3.3 will be most useful for assignment 2. Sometimes people, I don't know whether there is a AI suggestion or some other reason, when we look at, especially in critical thinking models, and there is a information element or standards of thinking, and sometimes we mention assumptions, and people sort of like expand into other following topics in my ABS. It's absolutely unnecessary. They will not be accessible. So please refrain from delving into topics 4 to 7 in my ABS, unnecessary, and focus on these ones, right? Another thing that I notice quite often is an effective use of the template. And okay, so it looks like this was the thing that we discussed in the previous segment, up to going through the template, which I showed, and also how to use it. Just a reminder, do not embed files, do not hyperlink it, submit it as one document. Think what needs to be in the appendices, so it's agenda and your contact if you're working on the main brief. And I also highlighted the confusion on concepts that sometimes happens in inaccurate use of terms and terminology. Yes, and we finished that first segment where we had a breakdown on how to use the template. So continuing from that, let's look into those concepts that we covered in seminar 1 on your theory, and what we really have to understand without any confusion are the differentiations between the concepts of the context, the process, and the managerial approach. So what we did, we asked the question, which models, which frameworks participants still remember from seminar 1 that are relevant to context analysis, and which frameworks or models people still remember about decision-making processes. So remember that the context is the environment around you, while the process is really step by step what we are doing. So there were some prompts during the webinar, and well, this is a reminder. If you look back into the assessment brief, and I will try to change the screen here, hoping that I'm sharing the assignment. In the template, it's very clearly where you have to talk about the context and where you start talking about the process, okay, process analysis, right? So back to our discussion. So what are the concepts that are applicable? So decision ecosystem. Oh, I remembered what I needed to show you. Just bear with me. So please read the assessment brief carefully, because this is what you need to do. Section 4 of the assignment, very important, because We are following help and done multi-process model in this unit throughout assignment 1 and 2. Right? In the context analysis, you have a reference what you need to do. So, for example, context, use the decision ecosystem, situational analysis of the context, like Kniffen model that we discussed in assignment 1. So back to my theory slides. Okay, so just remember that the external context is something that is unmodifiable and influences the decision making. Keep in mind that this model is not about business analysis as a similar model of PESTEL in business strategies, for example. Okay, in the internal context analysis, in the organizational context, this is what we usually talk about is the situation surrounding decision makers. And this is where we're using the Kniffen model, okay? Another very important point that I highlighted, that this model is not about having a complex problem or chaotic problem or complicated problem. This model is not about a problem. This model is about the situational context. Okay, so decision makers need to agree and have this shared common language about understanding in which situation they all are so that they can proceed with problem solving. I do encourage you to watch this very useful video in topic 142.4, where the author of the concept, Snowden, he is explaining the model. It's 8 minutes really well spent, and I do encourage you to do that. Now, in terms of the multi-process model, okay, this is our guiding model. This is part of your mandatory reading, prescribed reading, and this is where we can see the flow of certain steps. So because it is about the process, you can see the flow, you can see step after step. And this model is contemporary and it does include the context. So my question to the participants was, why are we using this particular model? Okay, and I was fishing for those answers, and I was so glad to hear that people do remember that this model, first of all, is updated, it's more contemporary, it's not a simplistic problem-solving models that sometimes you find in management textbook. You can see the decision-making loops, yeah, so sometimes you need to go through certain stages and then you might need to reframe or generate new ideas and understand that we might need to go to the first step and try again. And another very important reason why we're using this multi-process model is that it does acknowledge the importance of the context in which decisions are made, right? So that's an important thing to remember. Now, another question that we posed during the seminar was, why is it important to differentiate between the context and the process, right? Now I'm leaving you, dear listeners, to ponder about that for a couple of seconds. Yeah. So why is it important to differentiate between the context and the process? The answers that participants were coming with was, yes, correctly. We are in charge of the process, so we actually can control this, but we cannot control the context. And the same similar problem or even an identical problem could be solved differently in a different context. Okay, the solution may depend on the contextual influences. And that's why we need to understand our limits, how much we can do. So the decision-making approach, and these are the 3 key things that we are recapping from topic 1, the context, the process, and the manager's approach. So you may catch up on that as well. And the relevant theory concepts are about the schools of thought, modes of thinking, and the dual process theory. my question during the seminar was, who does remember what the dual process theory is about? So I do encourage you to get back to Kahneman in topic 1 and to refresh your memory, how we think, okay, fast and slow. Right, now the real topic for seminar 2 is around the problem. Yeah, we all have problems. I asked the group, is there anyone there who hasn't got a problem in their life? And I didn't see any hands coming up. So what is important, however, that the problem in our casual everyday language may be understood and perceived differently than from the critical thinking perspective, from the psychological or behavioral perspective that we are interested in here. So my first question is about the types of problems. Okay, so it is important to understand those nuances in concepts and theory. So what type of problem does this visual represent? And you have two options, option A and option B. What does it really say here? And there were different thoughts on this. And some people said, you know, that some could be analytical and rational and some may not be. However, both of those types represent a very rational types of problem, rational problem. However, the type is defined differently. Okay, so this one is an algebra problem. You can just, it's like an equation, 3 plus 7 is 10, or we do not know, we have a problem, we do not know what this number could be in this equation to get to 10. And basically there is one correct answer, yeah? While this graph represents a more complex problem. So the types of problems are really about having simple problems, which are often referred to well-structured or well-defined, and complex problems where the answer may vary and there could be different paths to solution. While in this one, is only one correct answer, straightforward, and that's why we say that this is a simple problem. Okay, so it's important to understand when I'm asking what type of problem, we're talking about simple and complex, or well-structured, ill-structured, or well-defined and ill-defined, right? Now, the confusion that occurs is between the problem types and then in terms of defining the problem itself, and that definition is also known as problem framing or problem statement, right? Now, remember, there is a section in your template and the assignment where you have to comment on the problem statement. Let me check whether I've got that here. No, so I will jump onto the assignment brief and scroll down, and this is what you are doing here. You are talking about the problem, you are thinking about the problem type, so you just need to identify and explain why it is this type in a very, very succinct way. And the assignment asks you to evaluate the problem statement. Okay, so first of all, we need to understand what it is. Okay, so it is the same as problem framing or problem definition. Problem statement is a starting point. If you go back into the this model or multi-process model, you will see that framing the decision or framing the problem is the starting point. And therefore, in research, in management, in lean management, we need to identify what is the current problem and where we want to get, right? So it is a concise statement. So the next question was why the problem statement is important, okay? And the answers, of course, were that, well, we need to understand what we need to solve, and exactly. And I want to share one case study here, which is not included into the readings because I participated in a conference, attended a conference later, where there was a brilliant idea or brilliant presentation from MasterCard senior managers or leaders, and they shared the experience how MasterCard organization with 30,000 employees were going through digital transformation, and everybody was on board and everybody was engaged. And they have identified that they have three key challenges: resources, structure, and communication. And however, the question was how well people, all those 30,000, how well do they understand the problem? And what was discovered there, that there was a difference, there was a gap between C-suite or, you know, senior leadership and frontline middle managers, how they see the problem. So the charts that they showed, basically how they defined or how they described the problem was three different ways. It's either about not enough resources, or misalignment with something, or the structure, and miscommunication. Yep. So we have three different definitions about the problem. And this is what that gap was, that C-level executives, they define it differently than those who are basically implementing the process, right? And when they were asked what they need to hear most, the highest ranked item that they have identified was the problem statement, because all of them need to understand it. So what are we trying to solve here, or will be solving? Because without understanding what the problem is, so without a clear problem statement, people focus on different things. Yep. So they misallocate resources somewhere. What are we trying to solve there? Okay, so you can see the full video. Those who are interested, you can click on it and you can watch it from the slides that I will be uploading. All right. Now, the task that we did in the webinar was read the scenario and state the problem. Okay, so this is the scenario that people were asked to read, and you have an opportunity now to stop the recording and read it for a minute to see there, or you might have read that in the learning materials already. So we have this John, a manager who is running two project teams, and there are different issues around it: low staff morale, some hostility in meetings that they are experiencing. There are two teams, and one team is seems to be quiet, and the manager John thinks that, oh, that's great, I've got team two, they seem to know what they are doing, right? So he has this thoughts about those two different things, but generally it is like frustration. He identifies that as a dysfunctional situation, right? So what is the problem in this scenario? Right. So I was fishing for the ideas from participants, how they see the problem. So this is what we got. So this is what I've written down during the webinar. Okay, how they stated the problem. So some people were saying, well, there is a restructuring, teams may need different things. So this is the verbatim from participants. Well, John was apparently the problem as well. Not able to do what they need to do due to conflicts, misperception of something. And some participants also offered the thoughts about, well, they needs to go back and have a look. Okay, so we had a conversation of this, and as you can see, like in some particular cases, you can see that people already offering some solutions here. Well, needs to go and do something, right? Now, when we have a situation like this, a very useful tool is to use the concept, which is called the anatomy of a problem. And you can read in your prescribed readings and Helping and Done textbook, in that chapter, in the segment of the chapter, a bit more explanation about this anatomy of the problem. But the thing is, that the problem, the way it is defined in behavioral economics, in behavioral decision making by psychologists, critical thinkers, is really this barrier between the start, yeah, and the goal of the problem. So this barrier exists, and it's like a sliding bar. The more we know about, the more clarity we have about the situation and the problem, the less problem space we get, which means that we are closer to the solution goal. Okay. So for us to define the problem, we need to define from the current state, from the start, where do we want to be? So our desired state is our problem goal. Okay, so this is the anatomy of a problem. And the discussion that we had was that actually, in real terms, when I asked the group to define where the problem, or define the problem based on that scenario, it wasn't anything there about the problem goal, where we need eventually to be. It was more about, talk about the situation people are in, rather than stating a problem. Okay, so how to use this anatomy of a problem. So let's try to think about where we want to be with this. And good ideas started coming in, like we want to create high-performing teams, maybe, or we really eventually need to deliver projects, be able to deliver projects, or we need to create collaboration or collaborative teams. Yeah. So what we say here, that we have more than one goal, actually, and depending on where we put the emphasis and how we articulate the problem, we will have different solutions. And so these arrows are about different paths to solving the problem, but it really very much depends on the definition, how we define it. Yep. So, for example, at the starting point, we say, well, we have a problem, dysfunctional team, or we have the need to solve that conflict in the group, right? In that project between two project groups. So depending which goal we emphasize, we highlight, and we focus on, the solution, the paths of solving the problem will depend. So this is the solution space here. Okay. The more we know, the more clarity we get where the problem is, the easier the achieving of the problem goal is going to be. Okay, so you may need to reflect between the difference of just venting and talking about the situation, problematic situation, and being able to define the problem using the structure of the anatomy of thinking. So how to write it? Okay, so there are a couple of tips here, and between in that conversation, this was a question, a short quiz. Is problem statement and problem definition the same? Okay, so you can stop the recording and think of your answer now. And now you restarted the recording. And in the group, there were a variety of answers. So some people said true and some people say false. However, it is the same. Problem statement, problem definition is the same. However, ill-defined problem, well-defined problem is a different concept from problem statement altogether. Keep in mind. So how do we write? How do we articulate a problem statement? Okay, so let's think about the need first. How can we solve something? So what is the need? Yeah, to achieve the desired outcome, which is our problem goal. Yep. So that could be helpful as a start. Now, if you read the materials, and this is what we talked about. So depending on the clarity, how much we currently know, this is the barrier and that barrier is really the problem. So barrier between the start and the goal is the problem. The more we know here from the start, the easier is the solution. If we need to learn more and gain more clarity, then the process may take longer. So an example of that was, I gave an example how I had to articulate when I was working on this unit. So what is the need? Why do we need this unit on decision making? Well, to equip managers with specific knowledge in, let's say, problem solving, different approaches, and so on. And so how can we achieve that? Or how might we get there to that solution, to the desired outcome? Yep. So the formulation articulation was, how can we offer a course of substantial depth and practical value to our students, right? Now, in your learning materials, you'll see that probably defined as an innovator's formula in articulating a problem statement. There are different ways of articulate a problem statement, but we encourage you to master one approach, and then you can keep on learning about that. Now, in identifying or articulating the problem, there are different approaches, right? And I asked the question, so which model is this? So if you're watching this recording, stop it and think for a moment. Wow, which is the model? Maybe it rings a bell from my readings or something that I've seen before. Well, most people were right on this, on the bank, and they identified that as a design thinking model. And the difference is that usually problem-solving methods and problem-solving decision-making models, they start with a problem definition. So what do we need to solve something? So what is that we want to solve? The difference, and then we go into those looking for ideas, generating ideas, thinking, brainstorming and so on. And well, innovators who very often use design thinking model, then they go into creating prototypes and testing prototypes, commercializing, right? Now, what is really unique about this model is that it has this first stage that many other models don't have, and it is the empathize stage. And the empathize stage is about gaining the user's perspective, like being in their shoes. I drew an eye here. So imagine you are seeing the world through somebody's eyes. Yeah. So it's not you judging what others need, but you are basically experiencing, living together. It's called an ethnography method, trying to see everything through their eyes. Okay, so innovators sometimes people sometimes don't know, they can't recognize, like in the 15 years ago, they didn't know they need an iPhone. Yeah, but somebody thought about, okay, so how people are using things, what would they like? Well, they would like to see somebody they are talking to. Okay, so they come with the solution later. An example which comes from one of your recommended readings is that design thinking approach may help you to see the problem in a very different way. Yep. So the first example here is, well, we have a problem and we have a slow elevator lift and people are complaining about it. And normally, logically thinking, okay, what can we do? So if we have something slow, we need to make it faster. Yep. So what are the options of making things like an elevator faster? We can install a new lift, which is modern and fast. We can upgrade something, or we can improve some software so it makes better, works better. Now, however, design thinking tells us, well, go and experience that with the user. And the users are mostly unhappy because it is an annoying wait. Yeah, so they have to wait. And so instead of thinking, okay, slow, fast, what can we do to make a person more sort of happier when they're waiting for that elevator? So how can we improve the experience of waiting, right? And there were some ideas that were generated: put up mirrors, play music, install sanitizer, and so on. Now, well, a pause. What was the solution? Okay, so the participants actually suggested that it was playing music, while in reality it was the mirrors. Yeah, and because people like looking at their own reflection, we have enough vanity, and just think about it. Rather than spending a lot of money on a new lift or upgrade, you just install mirrors and you solve the problem, and actually people stop complaining about a slow elevator. So that's the beauty of design thinking. In your assignment, right, remember that this point 4, from what you're observing, think about, was the problem stated in the meeting? Yeah, what are you noticing? So my tips for evaluation for your report: what did you see in the meeting? Yeah, how people presented the problem. Do you recognize those components from the problem anatomy? And really, if you are aspiring to a high distinction, try to present your own suggestion how that problem could have been articulated. Yeah, it's quite often that people are unable to articulate a problem. Right, now, so pitfall number 3, which is quite often, is that in that template, what I'm saying is most sort of like a descriptive style of writing rather than analysis, and slipping too much into the conversational details, what happened during the meeting in terms of what we're discussing, technicalities, peculiarities of business, and rather than thinking about applying and observing the behavior in decision making, observing whether people were following or not following the process, right? And using that help and done model as guidance. Another pitfall is going into description of describing the models. And this model, help and done, consists of 5 boxes and 3 arrows, right? It's not that important. It's enough for you to reference them, refer to them, but you are showing your understanding by applying and supporting them with examples from your observation. So that's my encouragement. This is what I would like you to do. Right, another important topic, and also part what you need to do in your assignment. Okay, so you are analyzing the process and you need to judge the effectiveness of critical thinking, okay, in whatever you saw, in what you saw in the meeting. So again, this is like an indication of the length of how deep the analysis could be. But most importantly, we need to understand what that critical thinking is, and the model that is prescribed for you. Just remember, if you look into point 4, you need to use the Paul Elder framework, and this is what it is, okay, in the template. And that's why we're using it now. Why are we using this model? Because it's one of the most respected models and authors who have created it. So they are the originators of the Critical Thinking Foundation, and it's now a large organization. It has grown. The resources there, well, if you are interested, you can Google and find it. And also, you have a very short recommended reading that is included into your week 2 by these 2 authors. So the reason there are other models which are academically not rigorous, and that's why we're using Paul and Elder, and that's the expectation. So this is the framework. Now, what is very important to understand, that just because people see arrows sometimes, they assume that this is a process. It is not a process. Actually, the center, the core of the model are the elements, and the elements are about the structure, how we think. So what we think, right? Do we have the purpose? Do we think with a purpose? Do we ask questions? What concepts do we use? Do we use different points of view? So this is really about the elements or structure of thinking. The standards are applied to those elements. So standards are applicable to elements. It's not like we start with standards and then we arrive to elements and then we get to the traits. So standards are about the quality of thinking. Do we have clarity of thinking? Do we have accuracy when we think, right? Now, intellectual traits is actually the journey of our lives, because we get wiser. And in my view, it's really what defines wisdom. You know, all those things, by developing our own thinking, structuring it well and applying that standards quality, we arrive at being wiser, basically, as human beings, right? And these are the key intellectual traits. So it is your reading, so I encourage you to look at it, right? And well, just let's take one element from the framework. So we have the element of information, as you can see here, right? Information. So it has a breakdown. So information consists of facts, observations, and experiences. So another activity that we had is to read this business scenario, and I asked the participants to identify, as in this task, facts, observations, and experiences. Where are they? Yeah. So you can have a look at them, at the text. Okay. So these were what we have noted, that the suggestion was that this person was a customer for 10 years. Another question mark was about each incident was investigated and turned out that the customer was correct. And then participants sort of had a question mark whether it's a fact or whether it's an observation or experience. Okay. They also identified that team members say that this client is a very good, loyal customer. So that is an observation, right? And that companies sometimes have glitches. So the participants and the group did really well. And I can, now, before I disclose the model answer, I want to show you how each of those components of information are defined. So facts are absolute truths. Yep, they are not debatable. Future events are not facts. Yeah, and observations, they can be true or may not be true. What we hear, like a weather report, and I gave an example. Well, my app actually shows that tomorrow in Melbourne we are going to have, let's say, rain and 18 degrees, right? Is it a fact? Well, it's not a fact. It is just an observation. And experience can be only based on the past. Yeah. However, the catch is that our memory sometimes plays up. So experience is different from a fact, yeah, because our memories could be distorted. Well, if it is an absolute truth, there's no distortion in that at all. So now disclosing the model answer to that activity. Okay, the fact the person has been a customer. These are two observations, and these are the experiences. So take your time to read through. Okay, another task that we had, I asked the participants to match the type of question with the intellectual standard, right? So powerful questioning is part of the structure of our thinking. So for us to be critical thinkers or become critical thinkers, we need to be able to ask good questions. And examples of questions are, how can we verify that participant attended the meeting, for example. So the suggestions for that was that it's probably an accuracy or precision. So there was a doubt whether this question actually signifies accuracy or precision. With question 2, could you give me more details of the meeting? There were suggestions that it's about clarity. There was a suggestion about completeness. There was a suggestion about accuracy as well. Okay, and the third question, can you give me an example from the experience? So the group thought that it's either a significance or logicalness or depth. So those standards could be overlapping slightly, but our precision of thinking is part of critical thinking as well. So I just want to reveal what they were, really. And I do encourage you to look up this Paul Elder model in the recommended reading, because there are more questions there that we can see. And let me just check. So there is a question list that will help to identify what they are. Okay. So the question, how can we verify, is about accuracy. So that's an accuracy intellectual standard. Could we give me more details? That's about precision. Can you give me more example from experience? It is more like clarity. It can be about depth, yeah, because we want to know more and we are digging. Okay, so powerful questioning is a feature of a critical thinker. So the task that the group had was, without much context, I asked them, so I'm just telling them, well, Peter is employed in some organization and he hasn't finished the report. Okay. And so the group had the task to write as many questions in 2 minutes as possible. So if you're watching this recording now, I suggest that you stop it and write as many questions as you can in 2 minutes about this situation. Peter hasn't finished the report. Okay. Now, I assume that you have written some questions. So test your own thinking. What the group had is the questions about why Peter didn't finish. Did he know about the time or what support he needed? And bottom line, when we read through those multiple questions, the conclusion was that somehow people thought that, well, there's something wrong with Peter who hasn't finished the report. Okay. And we didn't get to the stage where people started questioning whether Peter had an idea he had to write a report at all. Yeah, well, maybe nobody communicated to him that he needed to write something. Yeah. So this is a good test. Well, try to test your own questioning technique. And in your learning materials, you'll find more about Socratic questioning. But this is an example of the standard of thinking, which is fairness. So one of the standards is fairness. Yeah. So sometimes we are judging, sometimes we are not recognizing our biases in our own thinking, or we are using stereotypes, or we using, like in this case, in the group, we use more system 1 thinking rather than system 2 thinking, right? So that's an example. Okay, so critical thinking is absolutely critical, and there's no limit. Sky is your limit how well you can develop it using and hopefully using that theory will help you to advance your critical thinking. Okay. Right, so when a tip for application of critical thinking in the report is that rather than describing the model, remember that it's not a process, and in your discussion go for depth and select specific elements and standards, and I would say like 2 or 3 components from the framework, and this is where try to analyze them more and illustrate them with more practical examples from your observation. Right, now problem-solving strategies. As I mentioned, there is only a part of topic 3 that is critically important for your assignment 1, but the rest of it will be more important for assignment 2. It's just that we practically, in this short learning cycle, we do not have the opportunity to cover it all right, in seminar 2. So important tips here, right? Focus on modes of thinking in subtopic 3.1. This is what I suggest you do. The rest leave. You will need to revisit that and leave that. So what we talked about, the question, well, do you recognize this chart? Does it remind you of anything? Because it is about the modes of thinking. And what we have in mind is that this this visual represents us thinking, sort of like reaching for the stars and thinking about more than one ideas, and that's why it's called convergent, and it's quite often associated with creative thinking, yeah? And generation of ideas, ideation, generation of ideas. Now, when we have very many ideas, we need to scan them and to filter them and decide which ones are the most useful or useful for our decision making, for solutions. And this is where we select options from many options that we have previously generated. Right, so we are selecting options and we are going into decision making, and this decision making sort of consolidating way of thinking is convergent, because out of many we sort of connect the dots and we filter and select the best solutions. Quite often it is associated with more rational thinking. Now, but we have really to be very careful, because as you cannot as I say, reach for the stars and reach your toes at the same time. This is a bit like a fluctuation between convergent, divergent all the time. So any type of thinker would go naturally through this mode of thinking, convergent and divergent all the time. So problem-solving strategies, once again, very well, you might notice maybe some meetings they use a specific method, but most of it will be relevant to your assignment 2. However, convergent, divergent thinking could be relevant in, you know, what you were observing. Now, problem-solving strategies, quite straightforward theory there, and I would suggest that get back to that after you finish assignment 1, because you will be required to use at least one problem-solving strategy in your assignment 2. Where to pay attention in that theory is really that depending on the problem, you may need to use different types of strategies. So if you are stuck in the process somewhere, it is more likely that you will need to use one of those strategies that are, well, quite often defined as rational problem strategies, like 5 whys or working backwards. It's something like, if you have a fault, we need to find where the fault is. If we have an unknown problem, we quite often need to, or unusual, or we are in a very sort of emergency situation, we need to think outside the box. And this is where we apply more creative and design thinking techniques. And these are some of them, okay? Again, it will depend which one you select and which one you will use in your assignment 2. I use the same scenario usually in, explaining. So this this customer, we don't know where things fell through the cracks, and it is a process of service. So maybe we need to go and apply one of those problem-solving strategies, because they're usually most applicable to problems caused by process faults. Okay. So we didn't discuss any details, but I just listed, let's say, 5 whys. There is a very good reading on 5 whys. There is an example of a split half, and also a different type, which is more systems thinking, network, mind mapping. That's more a creative type of problem solving. All right. Now, what is important to finish up whichever divergent, convergent, creative, critical type of thinking, what is important to understand that there's so much synergy between the two, although people often think that, oh, this is rational and this is creative, as if it's very, very different. They are all using divergent, convergent thinking, and they are all using more or less the same stages. Like in critical thinking, to gain the clarity, we need to understand the context and we need to define the problem. In design thinking, we also need to define the problem. It's just like the way we go about it. We start with the empathy to get into the shoes of the user, and that helps us to define the problem. Just remember that lift, reframing the problem. Yeah, the solution space is very similar because it's about ideation, it's about generation of alternatives, and there's also a decision stage in both of them. Okay, so it's very important to remember that although we are talking like this approach or that approach, in essence, they have the same critical stages. So next time, we'll reflect on your assignment 1. We'll start with assignment 2 brief, and we'll discuss topics 4 and 5. Okay, so this is what we had time for in seminar 2. And I just hope that this recording helps you to catch up on your reading and consolidate your learning. So do not hesitate to ask any question. Email me directly, post a question on the forum. Probably emailing is faster, more effective in terms of, you know, the time, the response time, more quicker. And book a session with Melody. Remember that we are here to support you. Okay, so happy reading and happy learning.